You're listening to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
So, G. Elliott Morris is back. Let's try that again. Yeah. G. Elliott Morris is back. He is, as some of you will remember, the author of the perfectly named Substack publication, Strength in Numbers. And saying it's a Substack publication is, of course, we don't really have the language for this because it's not just things that get published. It's also a set of podcasts, a set of videos. It's a lot of interviews. So, it's a whole world of content. And it's great. So you should definitely go to Strength in Numbers. It's going to help you in the next few months keep your sanity. He's a data-driven journalist, an enormously smart consumer of polling data. And thank you for joining me again.
Well, I'm really happy to be back.
Let's, I guess, start with this. There's an awful lot of noise around the impact of the terrible and thoroughly racist gerrymandering we're seeing around the country. Can you help us understand what this means?
Well, I will give you a empirical understanding, but I do also have something I'd like to say in terms of democratic theory too. So don't let me forget. I think it's an important thing to mention. Look, if you're trying to track where the status of the gerrymandering is, let's start there. So last year we had gerrymanders sort of contesting gerrymanders in Texas and in California, which on net probably delivered the Republicans in Congress to between 1 and 2 seats. There was also gerrymandering in Virginia, which would have given the Democrats up to 4 additional seats in the House, but was struck down a week or 2 weeks ago. Time is a flat circle, Edwin. I can never really remember. And so we don't count those anymore. Democrats got lucky in a court case in Utah where they will pick up a seat because of partisan or because of other racial partisan gerrymandering concerns. The court is ordered to draw a new district, so Democrats get a bonus there. And then you, after that, have basically an avalanche of racial gerrymandering that has happened over the last 3 weeks. So let's recap that as well. First, you have in Florida, Republicans giving themselves an additional up to 4 seats by virtue of basically a combination partisan and racial gerrymander that they passed. And they passed their new map the day before the Supreme Court's Calais decision came down. This is the case 2 weeks ago that basically invalidates the Voting Rights Act or makes it effectively unenforceable. And some of those districts that the GOP drew were racial gerrymanders, and they were just hoping that the VRA would get struck down so they could get away with it. And hey, they were right? And then there's been a new map in Tennessee that dilutes the black voters in Memphis and takes away a Democratic district there. And we will see the same thing, dilution of black voters in Louisiana, Alabama, for sure, at least 2 seats from those 2 states combined, and potentially 1 more in South Carolina, maybe 1 in Georgia, depending on how aggressive the Republicans get there. So look, on net, you're adding all this up. Republicans are probably gaining between 6 and 8 or 9 seats in the U.S. House just by virtue of gerrymandering over the past year and a half.
Okay. Is that going to be enough?
That probably won't be enough for them to hold on to the House, if that's what you mean.
It is what I mean, but how many contested seats really are there in the country? Not that many.
Yeah, there's about 35 contested congressional districts at this point, and that's accounting for all of this gerrymandering. In 2024, there were 40-something. Now there will be 30, mid-30-something. So we're talking about Republicans effectively stealing, between 6 and 9 of the 40 competitive seats in the U.S. House of Representatives, a fourth of them, which will meaningfully reduce the responsiveness of the federal legislature to the concerns of voters. It will put more voters in safe districts where they have no chance ever of really changing the partisan control of those districts. That of course, is a real betrayal of democratic principles. But let me just explain your big question here, which is, can this gerrymandering basically ensure that Republicans hold on to the House? Probably not. Okay, probably not. So, three more numbers for you. I know this is a lot of numbers to open the show. Republicans had an edge of 3 seats in the House after the 2024 elections. Okay, so they had 220 seats. You need 218 for a majority, so 18, 19, 20. So that means they can only lose 3 seats or they lose their majority. Now they've given themselves an additional 6. But Edwin, the average loss of seats for the party in control of the White House and Congress during a midterm is closer to 25. And when you have a president at a 35% approval rating, that party typically loses close to 35 seats. So we are talking about a sort of building of an additional advantage that might matter in a contested, closely contested election like 2028. But in terms of the midterms, I'm still pretty confident Democrats are going to retain, or Democrats are going to be able to take that advantage, take that majority in November.
Well, that will come as a great relief because, as you know, there's a lot of noise that says the Republicans just stole the midterms. And I don't believe they have successfully stolen the midterms. They've certainly got
They're
their hand.
definitely trying to, and that will be the large part of the point, right? They are
And this won't
definitely
be the
trying
last
to.
thing they do either. Weirdly, some of these laws say you can change polling places and not tell people where the vote is. That also is, voter suppression. Old.
Yeah, so the Tennessee law that redraws the district also gives, I believe this is what you're referring to, gives
Yep.
local officials license to move polling places and not disclose the moving of those locations, which does cause confusion. We saw in the Texas primary elections, lots of voters in Dallas were confused. They filed, for judicial relief because they were not notified that their polling location had changed, and they did not get that relief because the laws in Texas said they did not need to be notified. And yeah, that will cause thousands, tens of thousands of people to
Lose their
give up
franchise.
voting.
Yep. This is in the so-called greatest democracy in the world. It's really amazing. You were going to talk political theory for a minute. You want me to remind you about that?
Well, I do like to step away from the numbers and mention, and it's sort of already said this in terms of the competitive districts. Gerrymandering is a form of cheating. Uh, there's really no justification for diluting votes to give yourself a partisan advantage. My worry here, not even in terms of the impacts on control of Congress, maybe Congress, going to the Republicans, even if Democrats win the popular vote. That's very likely. This happened in 2012. It's maybe even likely to happen now in 2028. The broader concern is that this partisan gerrymandering that the Supreme Court has now enabled will spread beyond the South to other Republican-held states outside the South and to Democratic states. And on both sides, voters will be significantly disenfranchised by being sorted into safe districts. And the government effectively at that point is not democratic, lowercase d democratic in any real meaningful sense of the word. So I like to say this because I don't want people to think we're losing sight of the fundamental democratic betrayal of all this gerrymandering just by focusing on the numbers. It is bad regardless of what it does to House control. And I'll get off my soapbox now.
So before we leave this conversation, at the end of this conversation, I want to come back to you and talk about some ways we can fight back against that. And that goes at like questions of proportional representation. We can talk about that at the end, because I think it's worth at least putting it out there. What do people think about all this gerrymandering? Do people dislike it, and do they blame one party more than the other for it?
I don't know about the partisan question. I mean, certainly the ground truth of the matter is that Republicans are more at blame. They appointed the Supreme Court justices who have enabled this, and they have historically gerrymandered more, both partisan and racially. If you do ask voters, do you support legislation for independent redistricting commissions for partisan fairness in districting, you will get close to 65% of Americans, at least in our polling last year at Strength in Numbers, that's what we found, in favor of that stuff. You can also frame the question differently. You can ask voters, even if these fairness reforms resulted in your party losing a couple of seats in Congress or being disadvantaged relative to where they are now, would you still support them? And a majority, 55-60% of voters still told us they would support the fairness reform. So there are, on the other side of that, obviously on the 45%, a lot of voters who would rather have the partisan advantage. And I
Yeah.
imagine that number is going to go up as states continue to gerrymander themselves and as the stakes of our politics rise ever higher. And that is concerning. But it is not the case that 90% of Americans would rather give up their franchise, their equal access to the franchise, for partisan advantage, even though that is obviously the case for our elected leaders.
Yeah. I asked that because I'm just trying to think of the impact that this has on the Senate races, as one more issue to campaign on. What do the Senate uh, election look like? I mean, it is closer than I ever thought it was. Um, I
Yeah,
think
so
we pick up
Democrats have
North
a
Carolina. I think, that we might get Ohio back. There's some really interesting things going on.
is that Democrats have a really good shot of flipping North Carolina. Their popular governor there is running for on the Democratic side against a Republican nominee who's never really held meaningful elected office there before and is flawed in some ways.
I want to add
Roy,
Anderson Clayton is going to be on this same show. She's the head of the
oh, the head
local,
of the
the
party, yeah,
Dems there, and she is a powerhouse.
that's
Yeah.
a good guest. So Roy Cooper's leading by double digits in these polls. I
Yep.
doubt he will end up winning by double digits, but I've been wrong before. So that could happen. The point is, it's very likely he will win that seat. Democrats are also, in my opinion, likely to pick up the seat in Maine, which is currently held by Susan Collins. She has managed in the past to outrun the state's partisan lean. It's a Democratic state in presidential years, but I think she's lost a lot of that advantage with the state's voters over the last 6 years since the last time she ran, and it's a big midterm year now where Democrats are really activated to vote, and it is a state that leans roughly 8 points to the Democrats already. So if she's losing some of those incumbency advantages that
Hmm.
she's usually conferred, then that's a potentially likely pickup there. Um, and then they're somewhere between a long shot and a toss up in Alaska, where ranked choice voting allows the state to escape its traditional red lean in presidential
Yep.
elections, and potentially winning Ohio, where they have some good recruitment. But Republicans have some decent recruitment there as well, and they will pour a lot of money into that race, not to lose it. So I think the control of the Senate's maybe a little bit less than a toss up. The Democrats may be slight underdogs, but hey, to your point, that is not that was not the conventional wisdom about this race for Senate control a year ago.
Um, I guess it depends on whether and the election is framed as Democrats versus Republicans, in which case it's going to be very, very close. But if Democrats manage to frame this campaign any other way, like it's about Donald Trump, it's about
Right.
ICE, it's about Iran, it's about inflation, it's about gas, it's about the ballroom. If they can manage to have the election on any of those grounds, um, the chances are better.
Well, Edwin, you've reminded me something as well, which is that there's an independent candidate in the campaigns in both Montana and Nebraska. And in the case of Nebraska's Senate race, this candidate Dan Osborne, who ran in 2024 and came very close to unseating the incumbent senator there, Deb Fischer, the Republican. He's running again, and those polls look pretty competitive.
Yeah,
And
and I think the
it,
Democrat just dropped out to support him.
which is what the Democratic Party needs to do in really red states like Nebraska. I mean, Nebraska is not anywhere close to being moderate. We're talking about crimson red states. The Democratic Party brand just doesn't work there anymore, not really because of any ideological reason, although that complicates things, but just socially. Like if you're a Democrat, you're not winning because the social identity there is so attached to the Republican Party or against the Democrats, really. It's a polarization thing. So running independent candidates there could give Democrats, it's not going to give them the majority if Dan Osborne wins Nebraska, but they might have a bipartisan ally for key legislation or for blocking any sort of reconciliation votes on, for example, spending $1 billion to fortify a ballroom on the White House that no one voted for. So there's some, just in terms of reframing the midterms, reframing like that Republican versus independent also helps. Just Donald Trump versus
Everyone.
anti-government sentiment, right? Anti-system sentiment there is really on the Democrat side.
I I should ask this. I think I know this. Donald Trump's popularity is not plateaued, has it?
His Yeah, every time it looks like it has stopped going down, it will go down a little bit more. Yeah. He's stuck around a 36.8% approval rating among US adults in my average right now. Um, he has never been lower than that number, but the number hasn't really moved all that much for about a month. Um, but this was what the polls looked like. As there was also a period of flat movement in the polls between January and February, and then the war in Iran started, and he lost 3 points. So you really can't predict where the polls are going to go with this guy, because you really can't predict what he's going to do.
I can predict what he's going to do. He's going to line his pockets. He's, he's gonna break the law and send people to court and tell them to lie in court. The stuff he's been doing the whole. I mean, I predict he's going to keep doing what he's been doing. I don't think we can expect him to change his stripes at this point.
Did you predict he was gonna bomb Iran though? That's more what I mean.
No,
If you could, we should get the Edwin Eisendorf
yeah,
prediction of what
yeah.
Donald Trump is going to do hooked into all of our
No,
models.
no, I did not predict that we would be dumb enough to go to confuse a target list with a strategy for war and turn the entire world against us because the entire world needs that strait to be open, and he closed
Yeah,
it.
right.
And now he's begging everybody to bail him out. And he's in China begging Xi to bail him out. Um,
Well,
you know,
even worse, I think the reporting there is that he didn't even ask him for help in dealing with the Strait of Hormuz crisis and demanding it to be reopened. Just more to your point on the incompetency here in terms of dealing with the actual concern of the American citizen right now, which is about prices rather than about lining the pockets of his supporters or the people in the 2024 campaign, who, by the way, met him in Mar-a-Lago, in which he pledged the biggest payday for oil and gas exporters of all time. But I don't have to tell you that.
no, but it's good to remind everyone. So, how is inflation polling? And I mean, I know they're doing their best to blame poor old Joe Biden for all of it, but people can't possibly believe that this is all Joe Biden.
No, no, they don't. And we do have some directly comparable numbers on this. So the pollster YouGov, in combination with the magazine The Economist, my former employer, asks Americans every week, do you support or oppose or do you approve or disapprove of how Donald Trump is handling the economy? Um, at Joe Biden's low point, this number was minus 20s, right? So the difference between the percent of people who approve and disapprove was 20 percentage points. That was the all-time low for Joe Biden. Um, and this number was, by the way, like the week that he dropped out of the presidential election because he had such a bad debate performance, which is going to factor into whether or not people approve of how he's handling something. So
Yep.
minus 20 is the benchmark. Donald Trump this week is at minus 24 on the economy. And if you ask Americans not how do you approve of the economy or how Trump is handling the economy, but how do you approve of how Donald Trump's handling prices in particular, he's at minus 44, which is an all-time low
Has
in
anybody
the
ever been
Economist YouGov
that?
tracking.
No, that sounds, I mean, I can't imagine a president ever being that low.
It's possible George W. Bush would have hit a number like this, but pollsters were not asking the prices question at that point, so I can't tell you yes or no. But either way, right? Donald Trump is at great recession level approval numbers on handling the economy
Where
at
was
best.
Jimmy Carter at the end of his term when the hostages were taken? I mean, this feels Jimmy Carter-y to me.
Yeah, I don't know on the top of my head what his
Okay.
approval rating overall was.
Well, you know, it's because you're young. I lived through it. Uh, so, um, are Americans seeing? I mean, when you ask about Donald Trump, his approval rating's terrible in the economy, but there's so many areas where he's doing damage. Do they generally think he's the disaster that I think he is, or do they not? They just think like I'm focused on prices.
My big meta theory here is that voters, to the extent they think about like the average person thinks about politics, um, which is not very often. Only about half of people in our polling say they watch the news or get news about politics from social media at any regular frequency. That person is experiencing politics um, through the lens of the economy, through economic conditions on the ground and or economic conditions that they have been expressed to these people by their social groups. Okay, their friends and their family, and maybe some people they follow on social media or whatever. Um, in that, if you buy that, then Donald, and this is the political science sort of conventional wisdom about how voters make their decisions, the less informed ones, then Donald Trump's 2024 victory is a result of economic anxiety and Biden's inability to this inability is in scare quotes for listeners here, to handle inflation. There's not really much you could have done from the COVID-induced supply shock, according to the National Bureau of Economic Research. But
And he
that
did
no,
something about it, and
we
it
won't
began to
relitigate
have an
Biden's
impact after he
inflation.
left. Yeah.
Right. If that is if that is our model for how their voters make decisions, and it seems right historically, and it seems right for Donald Trump's victory in 2024, then stuff like $4.67 gas, which is what it is at the gas station around the corner for me here in Virginia, which is almost $2 more than it was, a year and a half ago. That is an extinction level event for for a presidency, for a party's control of Congress, because that is such a negative signal, and voters who are experiencing that negative signal, about half of them really don't know anything about politics or the mechanisms of the oil market, and in any normal circumstance would just blame the president, deserve it or not. But this time you have a president
Who
who has been
deserved
claiming credit
it.
for his war in Iran and saying that it's necessary, saying on in television interviews this week that he doesn't think about the average American's financial situation
Right.
at all. He's just thinking about preventing Iran from having a nuclear weapon. And that is actually, that line from Trump is telling. They have no defense, so they're pivoting entirely away from, well, the economy will do well, or you need to endure some pain, which is what they were saying about the tariffs, to, our goal is preventing Iran from getting nukes. Please get on board with our
Yeah,
goal. Please,
really.
it's so bad for them to
Yes.
have nukes. Forget
Yeah,
about
which they don't have
your
and aren't going to
pocketbook.
have. All right. So Elliot, if you're thinking about how to campaign in this year, right, you have the half of the people who aren't paying much attention, and we need to tell them the economy's terrible and here's why. You know the economy's terrible and they don't care, right?
Right.
But that half of the people also don't always show up. Then you have the other chunk of people who are paying a lot of attention, who words like ballroom matter to, grift matters to, Iran matters to these people, Epstein matters to these people. How do you balance the things you have to say to the people who are paying attention and the things to get the folks who aren't paying attention to show up?
Yeah. That is the question for the campaigners. How do we get these normie voters to render their disapproval of the president and of the current economic situation at the ballot box? Well, it doesn't help the president that he is on TV all the time taking credit for the policies that are now causing everyday harm, that he's making the job of the campaigners very easy in terms of their ability to make advertisements that they can put on YouTube or local television or Instagram Reels or wherever. I don't do any of this. I'm kind of a boomer in this case. I don't really watch any of that stuff, so I never really get advertised to. Maybe they take out radio ads, Edwin. I don't know.
I don't know.
But there's so you can do outreach, and the president's making that job harder for himself. But there's also just a sort of typical dynamic in politics over the last decade, whereby people who tend to vote Democratic also tend to vote in midterm elections. They are
Right.
more engaged on
Yep.
average.
Yep.
So those voters who are already more predisposed to viewing Donald Trump's actions as unpresidential, or they just disapprove of them for partisan reasons, are already more likely to show up. So they may render So in other words, if you think of our of the midterm elections as a product, both of like general economic anxiety affecting the average person who's not really paying attention, and Donald Trump specific anxiety among those people who are paying attention, there's this is a double-edged sword. There's really no way around the bad midterm verdict for the White House.
That's interesting. And I think if you're a Republican candidate running out in the country, you call the White House, you get Susie Wiles on the phone, you say, "Come on, this isn't helping us. What are we supposed to do about it?" And she says, "Oh, I know, dear, but we can't tell Donald. We just can't tell him. Nobody can talk to him, because he'll be mad." So I think,
Yeah, I would love more reporting. I mean, over the last decade of how the White House is approaching giving Donald Trump his polling numbers, because he does talk about them. He will lie more when his polls are bad. I don't know if you've noticed this.
I've never had such good polling.
I
The
have
country
100%
loves me.
approval
Everybody
rating
says I'm
among
doing
MAGA
such a great
Republicans.
job.
Yeah, exactly. And he'll say that stuff more often when his numbers are worse. So I do think my theory is he's sort of reacting to them narcissistically in denying that that those bad
There's a
numbers
shock.
exist.
Reacting narcissistically from our president. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I want to ask you a different kind of question. Normal people like me, polling is problematic in election season. There's a there the We get horse race polling from now till the election, and it's confusing most of the time. But this year we have to add to it horse race polling about prediction markets. What's the deal with prediction markets and polling? Are they the same? Are they different? How are we supposed to think about all of that? Or should we just like read, sign up and read your newsletter to help us keep it straight?
That's a good start.
Yeah.
Thank you. Look, I would just really ignore the prediction markets. Um, let me tell you why. So you will hear arguments from the boosters of the prediction markets,
Hmm.
which these days, by the way, the prediction markets are paying journalists to write stories about prediction markets. They are paying CNN to carry the prediction market data on a little ticker, the Chiron on the bottom of the
Hmm.
CNN page. So if someone's boosting prediction markets, there is a good chance that that person has been paid by a prediction market in some sort of marketing
That's
contract,
interesting.
by the way. So you have to be really careful with the information you're observing or you're taking in, you're ingesting. Um, if you take in the scientific research on the prediction markets, you get a pretty wishy-washy conclusion as to their accuracy above and beyond what you will get from reading polling or reading the election forecasters from the likes of me, The Economist, etc. Um, and that is over the last 10 years or so. Prediction markets have been slightly less accurate than election forecasters, except for in the 2024 election. Um, in one case, and that is at the presidential level. Um, in fact, at the House and the Senate level in 2024, researchers found from Columbia, from a friend of mine, Rajiv Sethi, that and his team, that prediction markets were worse than the election forecasters at the House and the Senate level for 2024. So the real best track record year for the prediction markets, you will hear they beat the polls in 2024, but that is really only true at the presidential level in terms of the electoral college. Our forecast actually better predicted the winner of the popular vote, Donald
Hmm.
Trump, in 2024 as well, better than the prediction markets. So there's like a lot of misinformation and hyping going around on these prediction markets right now, and the actual research driven track record of them is not great.
Help me understand this though. If I were going to be placing a bet on a prediction market, I would want some data to inform how I make my prediction, how I make my bet.
Yeah, you would probably go to a website like mine and try to get some
That's
informed
exactly
consensus.
right. So I'm
Yes.
looking at polling data in order to place, my bet down on the prediction market. So like it seems like it's as good as the polling, except all the error that comes from people like me who misread the polls to get into my prediction market.
Yeah. Yeah, there are some election forecasters out there now who are using prediction markets as input into their models, and they're creating this weird
Okay, well, that's weird.
logical error. There's a weird feedback loop they're programming in there because you are going to issue your forecast and everyone will read it and then update their bets, and then that will update your forecast. And in theory, you could end up in this sort of death spiral of updating if
Yep.
the updating is not
Yep.
not very rational. And speaking of the participants not being very rational, here's another big rub of these prediction markets is they're being sold to us. I believe some of the terminology from the vote for the prediction market, Kalshi, is like a new source of ground truth about the world's events. If that's the case, then why are they so inaccurate at stuff like predicting the Pope? And the answer is because it's all reliant on the knowledge of the people who are participating in the market. And there's an unfortunate, maybe colloquialism in the prediction market and also the stock market space about good, smart money and dumb money, where those people who are participating in your market bring some level of information to them. And in prediction markets, unfortunately, the general trend is to have a lot of dumb money bet about
Well,
something.
right. I mean, the prediction markets have not learned what the financial markets learned in 1929, right? After the incredible crash that led to the Great Depression, we put in place all kinds of things that made sure that companies have to give enormous public, they have to be transparent so that people who are investors they can look at K1s, they can look at all this data that these companies who are in these markets file. So you have data when you make when you make your investments. But these prediction markets on politics don't have any of that. They are the reason why markets crashed in 1929, and the prediction markets are going to crash in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, it is worth just restating that they are unregulated in the sense that the
Right.
financial markets are regulated. These are not regulated financial products in the sense that if you bet in them, you can lose all of your money if the market goes down. They're not
Mhm.
insured at all. But also, there's a lot of insider trading. People trying to
Oh, you mean
buy
somebody
up
from in the
contracts.
administration on whether a bomb's going to get dropped tomorrow? Yeah.
Yes, such as that, but also in the electoral case, there was a story in NPR, I believe, last week. Although again, time's flat circle, we don't really know what time it is anymore. Could have been months ago, of a congressional staffer betting on the market whether or not their campaign would win based on internal polling that they got, and they placed their bets before those polls were made public. This is definition of insider trading
This
for trading
staffer's
on
name was
non-public
Pete Rose.
information.
I can't, yeah,
Yeah, we don't know who it was. The
yeah,
NPR protected their sources, which is
yeah.
kind of them. Better people than
So
me.
it's good a grift is everywhere. I want to go back in the time we have and talk about the ways we get out of the map making trap. And I was in a legislative body once. I participated in map making. It is an ugly, ugly process, and it is always, even if you have the best intentions, there's politics in the map making process.
Right.
Um,
I mean,
as
as you would
long as you have
expect, this
maps, people are going to make them. But
right.
I mean, the ancient Greeks had, in Athens, for one of their assemblies, they picked everybody by lottery, right? They just like, okay, they didn't even need districts. If you pick people by lottery, you get a random sample. You never have to draw a map. And by the way, then you don't have to worry about uh, uh, paying for campaigns. All of that goes away. That's not happening. But there are other paths we could take that would make map making less onerous. Do you want to, have you thought about that? I mean, multi-member districts or proportional representation. These are ideas that are out there. They're being tested in some places like Alaska.
The,
What do you think?
one of the other interesting things, just by the way, you jogged my memory about the government in Athens, is the chief magistrate was a different person every day.
Mm-hmm.
You were chosen by lottery. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, to be the president. It was changed every day. So you really didn't have probably a whole lot of institutional memory there, which is not good. Not a great way to do your presidency.
No, but you
So
had an Ostracon, which if we had would be a great thing right now.
yeah, there are some people working on that. I think I need to dig into my email inbox. I have some pitches from them. I get these pitches all the time now. Inbox is
You do.
useless, Edwin. Look, there's the problem we have today. The big two in terms of districting: racial gerrymandering and partisan gerrymandering. These are both downstream of the fact that you draw districts at all. Because districts have to be drawn, voters are going to be sorted into those districts. And because voters today are sorted geographically, more Democrats in the cities, more Republicans in rural areas, more Black voters in the cities, more white voters in rural areas, it is inherently easy to divide those urban, clustered voters in the urban areas and dilute their votes with voters outside of those cities, and to dilute the votes of both Black voters and Democrats. But it's just easier to do, just inherently easy to do, even if you have a fair districting system to do that. And it begs the question, why do we have to draw the districts at all? Nothing in the Constitution stipulates electoral districts, geographic based electoral districts for congressional elections. It just stipulates that there are elections and that members of the states will elect a certain number of Congress people in proportion to the population of those states. That's it. That's all it says. Historically, there have been other electoral systems in the United States for Congress. There have been multi-member districts where all the voters in a state held a statewide election, and those voters and its number of legislators were just assigned based on the results of that election. The way that these were done was not very fair historically. Those seats were not allocated proportionally, and so you got a lot of dominance again of Black Democrats in the South, or just Black voters in the South. They weren't Democrats at the time, by the white populations there. But there's a fairer system now. We have a fairer system now for doing something like that, and it's called proportional representation, where if you are, say, in Alabama and you are the Democratic Party and you win about 40% of the vote. I don't think people realize 40% of voters in Alabama are Democrats. It's a lot more than you would expect based on how people talk about Alabama. Democrats would then win 40% of Alabama's congressional districts, give or take. You can't really have 40% of an odd number, 7, for example. But you can get pretty close. And the idea is to change to an electoral system that doesn't have to draw districts and assigns those seats proportionally by party. And because the most important predictor of who you will vote for and whether or not the government will give you the policy that you want, that you favor, but the most important predictor of those two things is your party, it makes sense to have an electoral system that is structured around representing parties fairly.
Yeah, I mean, but people don't like political parties in America right now, so it's hard to tell people that and have them. So, I mean, you can have.
They don't like the parties they have right now, but I think they would like a party that actually represented and actually listened to them.
Yeah, and you can stand, and there are. I mean, we don't have to go into the weeds on this, but there are methods of proportional representation where people don't vote for party, they vote for candidates who stand with parties, and then the ones who are the lead, the districts that provide the most votes are the ones whose candidates fill that percentage in the proportional representation. So there's a bit of still voting for a person in this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So are these experiments possible in the United States? And I mean politically possible, given the numbers you've looked at.
Well, I think we are entering an era where demand for reform will be so high that what seemed impossible might seem impossible now is possible very soon.
Yeah.
Now, it takes some explanation, and I am not the most efficient messenger for proportional representation. Other people are working on the public communication of
Right.
this
But I think all
aren't
of us
so in the
have to
numbers.
start talking about these ideas so that they become possible.
I think over sustained conversation about a better electoral system, we will convince more people, and I've been trying to do that. But it's actually more about the general principle that the Constitution is made to be amended, and there's nothing in there that stipulates that we have this system now that is so easy to game, even if people aren't being nefarious, but for which the Supreme Court has granted the state the permission to be nefarious. There is a better future out there, and I think that is people want to hear that message, that optimistic message, and we already have so much shared ground about how how poor the current system of representation, how poorly it performs for the average person. So I think we can get there.
Yeah,
Yeah, and legally it's possible. Legally, it will take, the best political scientist on this, or at least most well known, is Lee Drutman. He thinks all it will take was one change to the 1967 Uniform Congressional Redistricting Act, or some such. I'm getting that
hmm
wrong because I haven't had my
hmm
second cup of coffee, Edwin. Um,
It's because
but it is
coffee's so
very
expensive.
it's very easy. Yes, it's
Yeah,
so expensive now.
yeah,
It's very easy to remove the current mandate that states have single member districts.
yeah, yeah.
It's
I think
just
that's
one
interesting.
congressional
I
law.
mean, so we have to have these discussions. I mean, the other possibility is doubling the size of the house. I mean, there are all kinds of things. You'd still have maps, but it would be more granular to people. So I don't. There are all kinds of things that are in the ether that will have to get sorted out. Sort of like Supreme Court reform. Everybody knows we got to do it. We might as well just keep saying it and make it possible to get it done.
Yep. Electoral systems do not change overnight, and there's so much intense anger that I think we can channel that into
Yeah,
productive
real elected
reform for the system. I've been, I think I'm one of the more optimistic people about this. I've been on this hype train for proportional representation for 5 or 6 years, but you know, uh, we are at the best. We are at the best point. Every year there are more people out there who want proportional representation too.
All right, well, that is going to be our last word. Just remind everybody between the times that you come and talk to me, how they can find your stuff and be better informed.
Edwin, I spend almost no time on social media. The best place to find my work is at strengthinnumbers.news, all one word.
Yep. And it is a great place. So everybody go to Strength in Numbers and get to know Elliott's work. You're going to need it to get through the next few months. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for having me back and for the very, very, very nice introduction.
You bet. All right, don't go away.